I found out they'd gone to the lake house without me because of a Facebook photo. It popped up on my screen while I was sitting in my recliner, still in my robe, sipping lukewarm coffee. My daughter-in-law had tagged everyone. My son, my grandkids, her parents, even the dog. The caption said, "Family weekend at the lake." So much love, I thought. Except there wasn't enough left for me. The photo looked like something out of a postcard. Golden sunlight on the water, the kids splashing by the dock, a grill smoking in the background. And there was my son Mark holding a plate of burgers, smiling big. He was wearing that flannel I'd bought him 2 Christmases ago. I hadn't seen him wear it once since. For a long minute I just stared at that picture. I didn't even blink. It felt like my heart slowed down a little, like my body was trying to protect me from the hurt by numbing everything. I scrolled down. More pictures. A video of them laughing, music playing, my grandkids roasting marshmallows. They looked happy. I wanted to be happy for them. I really did. But all I could think was, why didn't anyone tell me? I'd known they were planning something for the long weekend. I'd asked Mark a week before if he needed any help with food or packing. He said, "Nah, Mom, we're just keeping it simple this time. Maybe next time, okay? Maybe next time." He'd said it so casually that I didn't even realize simple meant without me. That Friday, I'd baked 2 pies, apple and pecan, just in case they decided to drop by before heading out. I'd even set the dining table thinking maybe they'd surprise me for dinner like they sometimes used to. The pies were still sitting there when I saw that Facebook post. I remember the smell of cinnamon filling the whole house, warm and sweet, like a memory that didn't know it wasn't welcome anymore. I didn't cry right away. I just sat there staring at the screen until my eyes went dry. Then slowly the tears came. Quiet ones, the kind that slip out before you can stop them. It wasn't the first time I'd been left out, but it was the first time it felt final. When you're young, loneliness feels like something you can fix. You can call someone, go somewhere, distract yourself. But when you're older, it starts to feel heavier. Like it's not just about missing people, but about realizing they've moved on from needing you. That night, I didn't bother heating up dinner. I just ate a slice of the cold pie, sitting alone at the table I'd set for no one. The clock ticked loud. Every sound in the house echoed, reminding me that silence can be louder than any noise. The next morning, I decided to go for a walk. The air was crisp, the kind of early fall cool that makes the leaves look sharper, brighter. I passed by the Johnsons' house, my neighbors. Their driveway was full. Kids running around, music playing, the smell of barbecue drifting over. I waved to Mrs. Johnson. She waved back, cheerful, not knowing that her wave made me feel lonelier somehow. I kept walking until I reached the park. There's a bench there under an old oak tree where I like to sit. From there, I can see the small lake and the ducks gliding across. I sat down and took a deep breath. "Guess it's just us today," I said out loud, half laughing to myself. An older man sitting a few benches away smiled at me. "Talking to the ducks?" he asked. "Better company than most," I said. He laughed softly like he understood. We chatted a bit. His name was Frank. Widowed, retired, used to be a mechanic. He told me his kids lived 2 states away and that he hadn't seen them in over a year. He said it lightly, but I could see something flicker in his eyes. A mix of pride and pain that I knew too well. Before I left, he said, "It's not that they don't love us. They just forget we're still here." That sentence stayed with me all day. When I got home, the pies were still on the counter. I took one and walked next door to Mrs. Harris's house. She's 82 and lives alone too. I hadn't seen her much since last winter, but she smiled big when she opened the door. "Well, aren't you a sight for sore eyes?" she said. "I made too much pie," I told her. "Thought you might want some." She invited me in, and we sat in her living room for over an hour. We talked about our gardens, the neighborhood, old recipes. I laughed for the first time in days. When I left, she hugged me tight and said, "Don't be a stranger, honey." Walking back home, I realized something. Maybe my family didn't think of me this weekend. Maybe they forgot to call. Maybe they didn't even mean to hurt me. But that didn't mean my life had to shrink around their absence. I still had people. Not the ones I gave birth to or raised, but people nonetheless. That night, I took out my old photo albums. I looked at the pictures of Mark as a little boy, missing his 2 front teeth, holding up his first fish, hugging me tight with dirty little hands. I smiled through the ache. Somewhere deep down, I still believed that little boy was in there somewhere. Maybe one day, he'd remember me the way I remembered him. For now, though, I made myself some tea, sat by the window, and watched the moonlight spill across the quiet street. The world outside was still moving, slowly, gently, and so was I. That was the night I decided something. If they didn't have room for me in their world, I'd make room for myself in mine. And for the first time in a long time, I slept without tears. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my kitchen table, soft and golden. It made the untouched pie glisten as if it were fresh again. For once, I didn't feel the sting of being forgotten. I just looked at it and smiled to myself. Funny thing about loneliness. The moment you stop running from it, it changes shape. I brewed a pot of coffee, poured it into my favorite old mug, the chipped one that says, "World's Best Mom." I used to hate that chip. Mark had accidentally cracked it years ago, and every time I saw it, it reminded me of how things had changed. But that morning, I looked at it differently. It wasn't broken. It was just lived in. After breakfast, I sat by the window watching the mailman pass by. A few kids rode their bikes down the street, their laughter echoing in the quiet air. I could have sat there all day, but something in me whispered, "Go out, do something." So I did. I put on a cardigan, grabbed my purse, and took the bus downtown. It felt strange at first, being out by myself, not because I had to run errands or meet someone, but just because I wanted to. The town was alive in its quiet way. The bookstore smelled of old paper and dust, a smell I hadn't realized I missed. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers across the spines of books I used to love. The owner, a kind woman named June, recognized me from years ago. "Well, look who it is," she said with a warm smile. "I haven't seen you in forever, dear. Still got that sweet tooth for mystery novels?" I laughed. I think I've got a sweet tooth for anything that keeps me company these days. She nodded like she understood exactly what I meant. "Books always will," she said. "They never forget you." I left the shop with 2 used novels and a little more lightness in my heart. From there, I walked to the park again, the same one with the oak tree. Frank was there too, sitting on the same bench, tossing crumbs to the ducks. "Well, if it isn't my favorite duck whisperer," he said when he saw me. I smiled. "They listen better than most people I know," he chuckled. "Ain't that the truth?" We talked for a long time, about nothing and everything. He told me about his wife, Marlene, how she used to sing while cooking, even when she couldn't carry a tune to save her life. I told him about my garden, and how the tomatoes never grew right after Mark moved out. Somewhere between our stories, the loneliness started to feel less sharp, like maybe it wasn't just mine to carry anymore. By the time I got home, the sky had turned orange. I felt tired, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from living a day you actually participated in. I reheated some soup, put on an old record, and sat at the table with my book. For the first time in years, I didn't check my phone to see if anyone had texted. I didn't need to. The next few days, I started to make little changes. I moved the dining table closer to the window. I put fresh flowers in a vase, something I hadn't done since my husband passed. I even dug out my paintbrushes from the back of the closet. They were dusty, stiff, but they still worked. I used to paint when I was younger. Landscapes, mostly. But this time, I didn't paint a scene. I painted how I felt. Soft blues, quiet grays, a little gold near the top. When I finished, it didn't look like anything in particular, but it looked like peace. That night, I posted it online, just for myself. But to my surprise, people commented. Old friends, neighbors, even strangers saying how calm it made them feel. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. The next week, I went back to the park and found Frank again. We started bringing sandwiches and sharing lunch. Some days we didn't even talk much. Just sat side by side, watching the world pass by. There's comfort in that kind of silence. One afternoon, he said something that stuck with me. You ever notice how we wait for people to fill our days? When all along, the days are waiting for us to fill them. I nodded, because I knew exactly what he meant. After that, I started filling my days differently. I joined a small book club at the library. Mostly retirees like me. A few widows. One young woman who said she came because she liked listening to stories from before her time. We met every Thursday, and every Thursday I had a reason to dress up, fix my hair, and leave the house. It felt good. There were moments, of course, when I still felt that sting, like when I'd see new photos of my family pop up online, birthdays I wasn't invited to, dinners I didn't know about. But instead of letting it break me, I learned to let it pass. One evening, I received a message from Mark. Just a short one. Hey, Mom. Sorry we didn't get to see you last weekend. Things were a little hectic. Hope you're doing okay. My heart fluttered, but I didn't let the ache take over. I wrote back simply, I'm doing all right, sweetheart. Hope you all had fun. He replied with a thumbs up emoji. That used to hurt. That little digital symbol standing in for actual words. But this time, it didn't. Because I had stopped expecting something from him that he didn't know how to give anymore. Instead, I gave it to myself. One Sunday morning, I went to the farmer's market. There was a local artist selling watercolor prints. I stopped to look and she said, You should join our workshop next week. We teach beginner classes at the community center. I almost said no out of habit. But then I remembered how empty no had made my life feel all these years. So I said yes. That class became something I looked forward to every week. There were 8 of us. A mix of ages and stories, each with their own quiet reason for being there. Some painted for therapy, some for fun. For me, it was a reminder that I could still create beauty from my own hands. Even if no one was watching, after class one day, one of the younger women, maybe in her 30s, said, You remind me of my grandmother. She passed away last year. I really like talking to you. Her words filled me with a warmth I didn't realize I'd been missing. That night, as I walked home under the fading light, I thought, maybe love doesn't disappear. It just changes form. Maybe the love I gave my family was never wasted. It just found its way back to me through strangers, through little acts of kindness, through quiet afternoons, painting under the sun. A few months passed this way. My days began to feel full. Not busy, but full. There's a difference. Busy feels like noise. Full feels like purpose. I still check my phone sometimes. Still hoped for a call from Mark or the kids. But when it didn't come, I didn't crumble. I'd make a cup of tea, grab my book, and remind myself, I still have me. And that was enough. One Friday evening, I was at the park again. The air smelled like rain, and the lake rippled under the soft wind. Frank wasn't there that day. I found out later he'd gone to visit his son. But I still sat on that same bench. A little girl ran past, chasing a balloon that had slipped from her hand. I caught it before it floated away and handed it back to her. Thank you, she giggled. Her mother smiled at me from a distance. I smiled back, and for a brief moment I felt connected. Part of something bigger than just my little corner of the world. As the sky turned gray and the first drops of rain began to fall, I stayed a little longer, letting them touch my skin. It didn't bother me. I'd spent too many years trying to avoid discomfort. Now I let it find me, because it meant I was alive. When I got home that night, I lit a candle and sat by the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. I thought about how much had changed in just a few months. Not because anyone had come back, but because I'd stopped waiting. And as the rain fell steady and soft, I whispered to myself, they left me out. But maybe I was never really outside. Maybe I just needed to find my own way in. That was the night I realized peace doesn't always come from people. Sometimes it comes from finally learning to be your own company. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of my solitude became almost musical. I would wake up early, make coffee, water the plants, and sit by the window as the sun painted the sky in soft golds and pinks. I used to think silence was something to be filled, with chatter, with television, with someone's presence. But now, I was learning that silence could be sacred. I began talking to myself, not out of loneliness, but out of kindness. I'd say things like, "You did good today," or "It's okay to rest." Small things, maybe, but they made the air feel lighter around me. One afternoon, I was reorganizing the attic, something I'd been putting off for years. The smell of old wood and dust filled the air as I opened box after box of forgotten memories. There were Mark's school drawings, his little handprints on yellowed paper, photos of birthdays, where I was still the one baking cakes and tying ribbons on gifts. I found a letter my late husband had written to me when we first got married. His handwriting was neat and careful, the way it always was. "No matter where life takes us," he wrote, "I hope you always feel loved, even when I'm not beside you." I sat there on the floor, letter trembling in my hands, and I cried. Not from sadness, but from the strange beauty of it all. Life changes so quietly, doesn't it? One day you're surrounded by noise and laughter, and then before you realize it, you're left with echoes. But maybe echoes aren't empty. Maybe they're reminders that something once mattered. Later that evening, I took a walk to the park again. The air smelled of autumn, crisp leaves and faint smoke from fireplaces nearby. The world felt like it was exhaling. I sat on my usual bench and watched a family setting up for a picnic nearby. A mother, a father, 2 kids. The youngest kept running around with excitement, tripping over his own little feet. I smiled without bitterness this time. There was a time when seeing families together would sting, but now I simply watched. Their laughter reminded me that joy still existed in the world, even if it wasn't mine to hold in that moment. As I sat there, an older woman approached and asked if she could share the bench. She introduced herself as Lillian. Her hands were wrinkled, but her eyes had that youthful spark that time can't erase. We talked easily, about the weather, the ducks, and eventually about life. She told me her husband had passed away 5 years ago, and that her children rarely visited. "You know what I do now?" she said, smiling. "Every morning I write one thing I'm thankful for on a little piece of paper and drop it into a jar. On days when the house feels too quiet, I pull one out and read it aloud." "That's beautiful," I said softly. "It saved me," she replied. "Gratitude doesn't fix the loneliness, dear, but it reminds you that you're still living, that you're still here." That night, I started my own gratitude jar. My first note simply said, "The kindness of strangers." Over time, the jar filled up with big things and small ones. Warm sunlight. A good book. The smell of rain. The sound of laughter from next door. Each one was a thread stitching my heart back together, quietly, patiently. A few weeks later, I went to the art workshop again. Our assignment was to paint something that made us feel alive. I painted a window, open, sunlight streaming through, a breeze stirring the curtains. It didn't symbolize freedom, really. It symbolized acceptance. When the class ended, one of the women, her name was Clara, came up to me and said, "Your painting feels peaceful, like it's okay to just be." I smiled. That's what I was trying to say. Clara and I started talking more after that. We began having coffee together every Saturday at a small cafe near the library. She was younger than me. in her 40s. But we understood each other in ways that age didn't matter. She had gone through a divorce, and her children lived with their father. "Some days I feel invisible," she admitted one morning, stirring her coffee slowly. "I know the feeling," I said. "But invisibility isn't the same as being forgotten. Sometimes it's just a pause, a space to breathe before you find yourself again." She smiled at that, and I realized something. Maybe my pain wasn't wasted. Maybe it could help someone else feel less alone. From then on, I made it my quiet mission to be there for others. Small gestures, a warm word, a listening ear. I volunteered at the library, helped with art setups, and spent time with people who needed company more than they needed conversation. Life didn't suddenly turn perfect, but it started to make sense again on Sunday afternoon. As I was cleaning up my art supplies, there was a knock on the door. My heart skipped a beat. Hardly anyone ever came unannounced. I opened it to find Mark standing there, awkward and unsure, holding a grocery bag. "Hi, Mom," he said almost too quietly. "Mark?" I whispered, surprised. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood," he said. "Thought I'd stop by." He stepped inside, looking around as if the house were both familiar and foreign to him. I could tell he noticed the changes, the flowers on the table, the paintings on the wall. "I brought you some soup," he said, setting the bag down. "I remembered you used to love the one from Tony's Deli." My throat tightened. "That's very thoughtful of you." We sat in the living room, the silence heavy but not unbearable. He finally said, "I'm sorry, Mom. I know I haven't been around much. Life's just been busy." I nodded. "I understand. You don't need to explain," but he did anyway. "I think I forgot that you needed me too. I thought you were fine on your own." I smiled sadly. "I am fine now, but it took me a while to get here." He looked down, his hands clasped tightly together. "The kids miss you, you know." I laughed softly. "I doubt that." "They do," he said firmly. "Ellie talks about how you used to braid her hair, and Sam keeps the little toy truck you gave him on his desk." Something warm and painful bloomed in my chest at the same time. We talked for hours that day, about the past, about regrets, about small things that suddenly felt important. When he left, he hugged me longer than he had in years. After he was gone, I sat in the quiet again. But it was different now. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of what had been said, of what still might be. The next weekend, Ellie called. Her little voice chirped through the phone. "Grandma, can we come visit soon?" I smiled so wide it hurt. "Of course, sweetheart. Anytime." When they came, I baked cookies, just like I used to. Ellie helped, spilling flour everywhere. And Sam sat at the table, eating dough when he thought I wasn't looking. And for a while, it felt like old times again. Except now, I wasn't clinging to the moment in fear it would vanish. I was just there, present, grounded, grateful. Later that evening, after they'd left, I sat on the porch watching the sunset. I realized that peace doesn't mean getting back everything you lost. Sometimes it means learning to live beautifully with what remains. The people who leave don't always come back, and when they do, it's never quite the same. But that's okay, because the version of me who used to wait endlessly isn't here anymore. Now I know how to be my own home. A few weeks after that visit from my son and the grandchildren, I found myself humming again, not out of habit or to fill the silence, but because I genuinely felt content. It wasn't a loud happiness, not the kind that bursts like fireworks. It was the soft, steady kind, the kind that hums quietly under your skin, like the low murmur of a comforting tune you've always known. I started to notice things I used to overlook, the way sunlight flickers on my living room wall in the late afternoon, the small sounds the house makes when it settles at night, the creak of wood, the whisper of wind against the window. They used to make me feel lonely. Now, They feel like the heartbeat of a space that's mine. I'd always imagined peace would come when everyone came back to me, when family would gather again, when apologies would be said, when laughter would return. But peace, it turned out, wasn't waiting in their return. It was quietly waiting inside me, patient and still, just waiting to be found. Every morning now, I walk to the same cafe on Main Street. The owner, Tony, knows my order by heart. Black coffee, 1 sugar. He always greets me with, "Morning, sunshine," even when I come in with my hair a mess and my sweater draped half off my shoulder. There's something about being known, even in small ways, that makes life softer. Sometimes I sit by the window and watch people pass by. Young couples, families, college kids rushing to class. I used to envy them. The noise, the purpose, the togetherness. Now I just observe, quietly, with a little smile. They're in the middle of their story. I'm in mine, and both are beautiful in their own ways. One afternoon, Clara, the woman from art class, joined me at the cafe. She brought along a small journal she'd started keeping, inspired by my gratitude jar. She said it helped her see the light even on hard days. I told her that sometimes I still had days where I missed my family so much I could barely stand it. She nodded and said, "Grief never leaves, does it? It just changes shape." That line stayed with me. Grief doesn't vanish. It softens. It folds itself into the fabric of your days until you learn to live with its weight. It's no longer a storm. It's the quiet rain that nourishes what's left behind. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail, a handwritten one. And I couldn't remember the last time I'd gotten one of those. It was from Ellie, my granddaughter. She wrote that she missed me, that she told her teacher all about me during Family Heroes Week. She said she described me as the bravest grandma because I live on my own and still paint and bake cookies and don't let anyone make me sad for too long. I cried when I read that, not out of sadness, but from the simple sweetness of being seen. Really seen. That letter became my most treasured thing. I keep it folded neatly in my nightstand drawer, beside the gratitude jar. The following Sunday, I took a walk to the church. I hadn't gone in years. Not since I started feeling out of place among the families sitting together, hands joined in prayer. But that day, something inside me nudged me to go. When I arrived, the old wooden doors creaked as I pushed them open. The same smell of wax and old hymn books filled the air. The choir was rehearsing softly, their voices blending like sunlight through stained glass. I found a seat near the back and just sat there. I didn't pray, not exactly. I just breathed. I thought about all the versions of myself that had sat in those pews before. The young woman newly married, the mother juggling too much, the widow trying to hold herself together. And now, this woman, older, calmer, finally at peace with her own company. After the service, one of the church ladies came up to me and said, "We've missed seeing you around." I smiled and said, "I guess I had to learn to find God in quiet places before I could come back." She nodded, and there was a kind understanding in her eyes. The kind only people who've walked through loneliness can share. That night, I sat by my window, watching the stars blink in the clear sky. It occurred to me how many nights I'd spent wishing for something different. Wishing for company, for laughter, for the sound of another voice in the house. And now, as I sat there with my cup of tea, I didn't wish for anything. For the first time in years, I felt full. A few months passed and winter arrived again. The world outside was quiet, wrapped in white. My little house glowed softly from the inside, warm against the cold. I decided to host something small. A tea afternoon for a few women from the art class and the neighborhood. I baked cookies, made sandwiches, and set the table with my good china. It felt nice to prepare for people again, to fill the house with the sound of laughter and clinking cups. Clara brought flowers. Lillian brought her homemade lemon cake. For hours, the house felt alive, humming with gentle conversation and warmth. At one point, Clara looked around and said, "You know, your home feels peaceful, like it's been waiting for people to come back, but it never got bitter in the waiting." That line made me smile. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting who left, but remembering who stayed. When everyone left, I stood by the door, looking at the empty plates and half-drunk cups of tea, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't loneliness this time. It was satisfaction, because I realized, even when no one comes, I can still fill the room with warmth. Weeks later, I was walking through the park again when I saw a young mother struggling with a stroller, her toddler crying. Without thinking, I walked over and helped her adjust the wheel. She smiled in relief and said, "Thank you, ma'am. You just saved me." "It's all right," I said. "I've been where you are." She laughed and said, "I hope I'm as calm as you one day." As I walked away, her words echoed in my head. Calm. That's what I'd become. Not by choice, not by luck, but by learning. Learning to live with the empty spaces. Learning that being left out doesn't mean you're left behind. That night, I wrote something new for my gratitude jar. Peace found in my own company. And I realized that was my story now. Not the one where I was forgotten, but the one where I remembered myself. The next morning, I woke up to find snow falling outside. Thick, soft flakes covering the world in silence. I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat by the window with my coffee. There was something magical about the stillness, the way everything looked clean and new. I thought about my family, about Mark and the kids. I didn't resent them anymore. They were living their lives the way they knew how. And maybe, in some quiet way, they still thought of me too. Maybe love doesn't disappear just because it changes shape. I looked around my little house, at the plants growing in their corners, the paintings on the wall, the little notes in the jar. And I realized this was enough. This was a good life, not the one I planned, but the one I built with my own hands, my own patience, my own peace. The weeks rolled on, and life began to settle into a rhythm I didn't know I needed. Mornings with quiet coffee, afternoons with a good book, evenings with my thoughts and the soft hum of the world outside. There was peace in the stillness, something I used to run from, but now I cherished it. Every once in a while, my phone would light up with a family group photo or a short message. "Hope you're doing well, Mom." I'd reply politely, never with bitterness, just calm. They didn't understand, and I no longer needed them to. For the first time, my peace wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. I started a small garden in my backyard, something I hadn't done since my husband passed. The first day I planted a few seeds. I remember thinking how symbolic it felt, starting again from the soil up. I'd wake up every morning and check on those little green sprouts like they were my companions. Slowly, my home began to bloom again. Not from noise or chaos, but from quiet joy. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch sipping lemonade, my neighbor's little girl, Lily, came running over with a drawing. "Miss Clara, I made this for you," she said, holding up a crayon sketch of the two of us sitting under my tree. I smiled so wide my cheeks ached. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "It's beautiful." She looked up at me and said, "You're like my grandma now." That simple sentence, it warmed something deep inside me that I thought had gone cold forever. I realized then that family isn't just about blood. It's about connection, about kindness, about the people who see you, truly see you, even when the ones who should don't. Lily's parents started inviting me over for Sunday dinners. At first I hesitated, afraid I'd intrude, but they insisted, and soon those dinners became something I looked forward to. The laughter, the conversation, the smell of home-cooked meals. It reminded me that life still had warmth left to offer. One night, as I was leaving, Lily hugged me tight and said, "Don't ever feel alone, okay?" I nodded, holding back tears, because for the first time in years, I didn't. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far I'd come. The loneliness that once felt unbearable had transformed into peace. The rejection that once stung had turned into freedom. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was simply grateful. Grateful for silence, for sunlight, for second chances in unexpected places. Sometimes people will walk out of your life without warning. They'll make you feel like you don't matter, like you're invisible. But what they don't realize is that sometimes being left out is life's way of guiding you back home, back to yourself. If you've ever felt forgotten, left behind, or uninvited, I want you to remember this. You are not alone. You are enough. And sometimes, peace doesn't come from others. It comes when you finally learn to love your own company. As I sit here now, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I feel that peace again. Steady, soft, and strong. They may have left me out, but in doing so, they gave me something far more precious. The chance to find myself. So to anyone listening, if you've been left behind, if you've been told you don't belong, please don't let that break you. Let it rebuild you. Because the truth is, you don't need a crowd to feel whole. Sometimes all you need is you. And if my story touched your heart even a little, please, like, share, and subscribe. Not just to support me, but to remind someone else out there that peace can be found, even in the quietest corners of life. Because sometimes, being alone isn't the end. It's the beginning of truly living.